My life as a medical student is pretty much exactly what you would expect. Most of my day is spent studying complicated diseases and complicated symptoms, as well as even more complicated terminology like sphenopalatine ganglioneuralgia or cholecystolithiasis. I mean, come on, let's face it. If you're not frantically Googling the pronunciation of whatever the heck this is before presenting a patient to an attending, are you really in medical school? And admittedly, like most 20-somethings, I spend a significant amount of my day engaging with social media. Now, to be fair, this really only serves me one purpose, giving my brain a break from all the studying by laughing at memes. In many ways, memes have become a sort of universal language among young people. They effectively portray and communicate cultural expectations, social norms, and current sentiments. So for the purposes of illustration, I thought I would pull just a couple of medically related memes made by students and physicians alike for you all today. So here's one. Now, I think a lot of students would probably laugh at this meme, or at the very least, they'd probably relate to it on some level. Memes like this give both creators and consumers a sense of solidarity, a sense of, hey, yeah, maybe this experience is hard, but at least we can all acknowledge it and laugh about it. Even so, let's not glaze over some of the darker undertones being portrayed here, because every day I also see images similar to this one that portray the unhappiness of students and residents as they brave a happy face and work long, sometimes 30+ hour shifts, while also silently battling their own demons of depression, burnout, and anxiety. So yeah, these memes might be funny and we might laugh about them privately, but the reality they're alluding to isn't funny at all. The internet hosts yet another symptom of a deeper syndrome, the so-called medspiration pages. Now here, ideas probably otherwise thought of as toxic have become normal expectations for many students. Expectations that studying should be the only priority in your life, that all personal relationships must go on hold until after your medical training concludes, that you must literally suffer to succeed. You must deprive yourself of sleep, food, and exercise in order to achieve your goals. Now, these aren't funny in the slightest, and I really don't think there's any covering up this very clear message. In order to be a successful physician, in order to take care of other people, you cannot take care of yourself. Now, this disturbing ideology certainly extends beyond the internet into everyday life, and the effects of it aren't subtle either. I call the consequences of this ideology the inflammation effect. In medicine, we understand that negative health consequences aren't always caused by acute injuries or diseases. Rather, low levels of inflammation. So low, they're probably not actually even noticeable to the patient. Over time can grow larger to have devastating consequences. This erosion of well-being is happening within the medical community on a cultural level. Small daily behaviors like bragging about how much you study, how little you sleep, or the classic, oh my gosh, that exam was so hard, I only got a 90%. I'm never going to get a good residency. Well, those are the inflammation, and we're exposed to them constantly. Just recently, I saw an Instagram post from a student on their surgical rotation proudly proclaiming, I haven't slept in 36 hours. If you're not grinding, you're not winning. I don't know about that. Okay, so sometimes you have to work 36 hours. I understand that, but you're bragging about it? When is this something we brag about? Am I supposed to be impressed? Once I started noticing this inflammation, I couldn't stop seeing it, and it really started to bother me. This wasn't something I had noticed in undergrad, so what had changed? Over the course of the past year, I made it my mission to get to the root of this problematic culture. It's a really interesting and also very frustrating phenomenon. I would ask a group of classmates about how they perceived their performance as a medical student. And as long as there were other people around, they would say things like, oh, well, if it were easy, everyone would do it, or it is what it is. But one-on-one, the truth would come out. They would tell me how unwell they felt, how burnt out they had become, and how little they felt they could trust their peers because they're who I'm competing with. Actually, privately, every single person I talked to acknowledged that there was a toxic culture brewing, but no one dared to admit it publicly. So the first thing I wanted to know was whether this inflammation was localized only to my own medical school. To find out, I reached out to students at several other medical schools all across the United States. I asked them about their school cultures, as well as their own personal and professional motivations and experiences within the medical education system. Here's what I found out. 91% of students felt as though medical school was academically challenging. Oh. 82% of students felt daily pressure to study. 65% of students cited peer pressure as a major motivator for their studies. And 73% don't discuss their grades, study habits, or class ranking with others. Now, these numbers didn't really surprise me. Of course, medical school involves lots of studying, and I think it's really reasonable to expect students to work hard when they perceive their peers to also be studying hard. I did wonder, however, if this amount they were perceiving actually aligned with reality. Well, no, unsurprisingly, it doesn't. And in fact, on average, students are overestimating how hard their peers are working by about 30%. Further, 39% reported feeling inferior to their peers, and 63% reported feeling guilty if they didn't study for a certain amount of time each day. But here's the most disturbing statistic. 22% of students I surveyed reported that they engaged in what I would call manipulative or malignant behavior, which included things like withholding helpful resources from classmates, lying to them about instruction times, giving them intentionally falsified notes, or speaking ill of them to residents and attendings. Now, this isn't the majority of students, but I do fear that it's enough to have serious consequences for everyone. Manipulative behaviors like this result in widespread distrust within student communities, which only further exacerbates the already warped perceptions and feelings of inferiority felt by so many. Even physicians have told me about the passive-aggressive or sometimes blatantly aggressive behaviors that often permeate hospital hallways. One resident told me about an old medical school classmate who actually went so far as to put mouthwash in the contact lens solution of a colleague in order to mess him up before an important interview. Bad, I know. So why are we doing this? How have we gotten to the point where stepping on each other to propel ourselves to the top is not only acceptable, but normal, and maybe to some degree, expected? There are two ways to view the origins of this toxic culture. One is the result of several systematic issues, and one is a more individualized issue. Let's start systematically. By 2032, there will be an estimated shortage of 122,000 physicians in this country. To combat this, medical school admissions have risen 31% since 2002. And yet available residency positions have not risen to meet this increased demand, which means that finding necessary postgraduate training has become much, much more competitive. On top of that, it's also worth mentioning that in 2024, the average graduating debt of a medical student will exceed $300,000. So of course, as far as we students are concerned, this all sets off a bit of a panic. We're spending decades of our lives and hundreds of thousands of dollars on our education, and yet it is increasingly unlikely that we will be able to find desired residency placements upon graduation, all while millions of Americans continue to suffer from lack of access to healthcare. Of course, students feel pressure to compete and do well. But still, let's not all forget why medical students are medical students, and that's to learn medicine and to learn it well. Even here, we're starting to see some issues. Of course, there's always pressure to do well, but the criteria of what it means to do well keeps rising higher and higher. To illustrate this, check out USMLE Step 1, the first standardized national board exam that students all take, as a proxy. So as you can see here, every year, minimum passing scores, as well as the national average scores, are rising higher and higher. So are students smarter? Probably not. Are they working harder to meet higher expectations? Yes. Is there a limit to how hard they can push themselves? I think we might be approaching that limit now. These are very intelligent, driven individuals, and yet over 1/5 of them report regular prescription stimulant use. That's 3 times higher than college students. 76% of them report that they use these stimulants regularly in order to keep up with academic demands they feel they would not otherwise be able to meet. The good news is that we're starting to see some changes in start of these systematic issues. The USMLE announced that starting next year, Step 1 would be evaluated on a pass-fail basis, which is a massive step towards driving intense testing pressure on students downwards. Further, many medical school curriculums are also implementing pass-fail standards so that students are no longer pitted directly against each other for class rankings. These are actually really good things for the mental health of our students, and we can all look forward to seeing more positive changes in the future. There is, however, the individual piece of this puzzle, and this is the component I really want to focus on because a large part of the problem lies within our community itself. The field of medicine has had a long and tumultuous relationship with the perpetuation of burnout culture. Many senior physicians still subscribe to the idea of, I suffered when I was younger, so now you need to suffer too. That idea is dangerous. If this were a fraternity that was hazing students by encouraging them to stay awake for days by using illicit substances to do so, there would be outrage, wouldn't there? Listen, we're already in the middle of the medical mental health crisis. As many as 50% of current physicians meet diagnostic criteria for mental illness, and yet only 26% of them are actually seeking help. They very hypocritically are doing exactly what they tell their patients not to do. They don't reach out, they don't ask for help, and they're not making their own health a priority. Tragically, this means that the suicide rate among physicians is 2 to 3 times higher than the general population. And yet these thousands of deaths tend to be swept underneath the rug by this culture. Students mirror these figures closely, but what's interesting is that when they begin medical school, the prevalence of their mental health concerns is actually about the same as their non-medical counterparts, which suggests that it's the demand and drive of their education that contributes to their decline. And just like their attendings, students also aren't seeking the help they need. The most commonly cited reason why is fear of embarrassment around peers. Peers. There's that word again. This really is a largely cultural problem. Not only is peer fear contributing to the decline of the health of many students, as well as the perpetuation of sabotage and mistrust. It's the serious issue that we need to address. Now, many of the issues I have presented today are rooted in systematic shortcomings, very much out of control for the majority of us. But they are greatly magnified by factors that are within our control. And please don't mistake me. The point of this talk today wasn't to complain about the woes of being a medical student. I knew what I was getting myself into when I enrolled in medical school. However, I'm not ignorant to the challenges that we face moving forward as a community. Every day, I watch the people I learn and work with suffer in silence because their voices are squelched by a culture that encourages self-destruction in pursuit of what we deem as success. We cannot, in good conscience, continue to stand by and justify this destruction because your medical education needs to be extremely difficult. Now, learning huge amounts of material can be difficult. Making decisions of life and death can be difficult. Working those very long shifts to see many patients in a strained healthcare system, that can be difficult. Not everyone is willing or able to do this work, and nor should they be. But at the very least, what I'm saying is that being able to trust your friends, should not be hard, nor should be being able to find security amongst your coworkers. Getting help in dealing with unique career stressors should not be hard. Feeling valued as a learner and young professional should not be hard. It's important that we all ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Am I mentioning to my classmate that I haven't slept in 36 hours because I want affirmation, sympathy? Do I want to be told, wow, you work so hard, when in reality I should be told, dude, that's not healthy? I have two things to ask of all medical professionals, present and future. Number one, be genuine. Consider the consequences of your words and actions, and do not mislead others for personal gain. If you need help, ask for help. If something goes wrong, don't say that it went well. We must each consciously work to break these illusions of perfection that have become so dominating in this age of technology. Because listen, everyone struggles. Everyone has bad days. And if they tell you that they don't, they're not being honest with you. The more open and honest we can be with each other about our challenges, the more it encourages everyone to work together instead of against each other. Number two, have a voice. Do not stand for mistreatment. Do not excuse lies or manipulation just because it feels normal. This is a massive issue that is eating our community internally, and it's a problem that can only be solved internally. Remember, our wellness as healthcare providers affects much more than just ourselves. Now, I don't expect these changes to happen overnight, but if today we can all agree and accept that we do what we do for the wellness of our millions of patients, why do we not treat each other with the same degree of care? Thank you.